فيما يتعلق بالانبعاثات والحد منها وخطط ومساهمة الولايات المتحدة في جهود التكيف والتخفيف. أود أن أشكر فخامة الرئيس بايدن وحكومته على دعمه لجهود التعاون مع مصر. هذا سيكون موضوع اجتماعنا. فخامة الرئيس السيسي قال في كلمته أمام القمة في 7 نوفمبر بأنه يؤكد على أهمية التعاون بين الشمال والجنوب وأهمية النهج غير البعيد عن المواجهة، وذلك مركزا على الحاجة دعم الدول النامية في جهودها نحو التكيف. وكما تعرفون جميعا وكما شاهدنا في الكثير من التقارير العلمية وآخرها تقرير
Adaptation Gap Report, the world is confronted with an enormous gap in addressing adaptation and resilience that must be bridged through accelerated action. COP27 takes place in Africa, and there are high expectations that the implementation COP will deliver substantive progress and implementable climate action on the priority issues for Africa and other developing countries, including on adaptation and resilience. As you all know, Africa contributes less than 4% to global greenhouse gas emissions, and yet is one of the most adversely impacted regions according to the IPCC report. The key challenge for African countries is to access new, at-scale and predictable funding for climate action. Recognizing that progress towards adapting to climate consequences and enhancing resilience is crucially needed, we launched a couple of days ago here at COP27 the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda. This agenda comprises a total of 30 global adaptation outcome targets by 2030 that are urgently needed to address the adaptation gap and increase the resilience of 4 billion people through accelerated transformation across 5 impact systems: food and agriculture, water and nature, coastal and oceans, human settlements, and infrastructure. Furthermore, it has a regional component through encompassing a number of African-focused outcomes targets. We are also pleased that the African Adaptation Initiative, which was launched by President Sisi at COP21 in Paris in 2015, and which will now be hosted in Egypt, will be part of today's support package, which will be announced later in this event. We sincerely hope that the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda will represent a significant contribution to enhancing global action on adaptation and resilience as an utmost priority for all developing countries. Egypt, as COP27 president and as an African nation, is well aware of the adaptation challenges facing our continent and is pleased to have collaborated over the past year with the United States to develop a diverse package of support for Africa in the field of adaptation and resilience. In so doing, Egypt and the United States were keenly aware that such support must be innovative, impactful, and transformative, while not leading to any debt burden using grant-based and concessional finance instruments. On our part, and aware of the capacity challenges in Africa, which represents an impediment to adaptation action across the continent, we are pleased to partner with the United States in establishing in Egypt the Cairo Center for Learning and Excellence on Adaptation and Resilience, which we hope will become a world-class institution of training, capacity building, academic research, and exchange of experiences and knowledge to benefit practitioners and government officials working in all fields related to adaptation. While this center is focused at this time on building capacity for Africa, our hope is that we will be in a position in the future to expand it to include instruction for those who need it from all parts of the developing world. While we are grateful to the United States government for its support in this regard, we welcome further support from governments and various entities. Distinguished participants, You will be hearing from Secretary Kerry in his remarks about the full range of contributions in support of adaptation in Africa. And I therefore wish to conclude my remarks by thanking the United States for the extremely constructive collaborations we have had over the past year in developing this package, which demonstrates the commitment of both Egypt and the United States to the cause of adaptation in Africa, and is indeed an exemplary representation of COP27 mantra of implementation and action. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister Shukri. And now I invite Secretary Kerry to make a few remarks. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abu Magd, and thank you, Minister Shukri. We really are pleased and grateful for the job that Egypt has done thus far. We're 6 days in, folks. Another week to go, and I think we're on a path to really accomplish a great deal here. It's a great pleasure for the United States to co-host this event on adaptation in Africa together with the government of Egypt. And I want to re-emphasize that we support wholly the Glasgow provision to collectively double adaptation finance. And as you heard from President Biden, we will do our part. And if we had our way, there would be a lot more money coming, because obviously adaptation is desperately needed in many parts of the world. One of the things that leaps out at us is that obviously mitigation is critical to prevent the adaptation from being needed, but everybody here knows that there are a critical amount of lives to be saved, a critical amount of property to be protected from damage, that adaptation is absolutely critical, even though there is a point where if we do not reduce emissions sufficiently, you're not capable of adapting your way out of the catastrophe of the climate crisis when you get into the highest temperatures. So that should just underscore to all of us, we need to adapt, we need to adapt, we need to adapt. But we also need to work together on the holistic approach to the challenge. President Biden just announced here how the United States will further accelerate our implementation of his emergency plan for adaptation and resilience. It's known as PREPARE. And the President has announced a full measure of $12 billion, and he is seeking the first tranche of the $3 billion from the Congress. But certainly last Tuesday, we think hopefully helped us to be able to deliver on that. The President also announced earlier tonight more than $150 million in new money for a few key adaptation programs in Africa that we're going to talk about in greater depth today. And these programs will accelerate the implementation of PREPARE in Africa, where the United States will now be investing more than $500 million just in 2022 alone. I want to call out here or highlight 4 specific programs very quickly. First, we're responding to the UN Secretary General's call for early warning for all within the next 5 years, and we will contribute more than $28 million to help start that process and close the gap in Africa. Second, we will provide $24 million to help farmers access insurance so that when disasters strike, they're going to have the support that they need when they need it. And third, I'm pleased that we're going to also provide $10 million to help Egypt. This is just to help get started Egypt's new Cairo Center for Learning and Excellence on Adaptation and Resilience. And finally, I am pleased that we're providing an additional $25 million in the African Union's Africa Adaptation Initiative, the AAI. And this 25 million will launch a new food security accelerator, and we're joining forces with the government of Egypt, who are the hosts of AI, on this effort. Let me emphasize, President Biden made this clear, and I'll reiterate it. We need trillions of dollars, and we need more funding to be able to come to the table, and we've announced 2 mechanisms already here at the COP, which we're going to work diligently to implement, which could, in fact, put the billions of dollars that we need on the table. So we're delighted to be part of this multi-government effort here. We're going to hear more about the training center and the food security accelerator. We're also going to hear more from the private sector on how it is mobilizing private capital and innovation for adaptation in Africa. And I want to emphasize, none of what we're proposing with respect to the private sector is to make up for any commitment that has been made with respect to the public sector. It is additive. It is a plus-up. And some of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world obviously are on this continent. In fact, I think 17 of the 20 most vulnerable climate crisis related potential damage countries are on the continent. So my friends, we are completely committed to working together with our partners to support vulnerable communities in their efforts to, sadly, have to adapt to the impacts of climate change, something that everyone, developed country and less developed and developing country, emerging economies, all of us are impacted in ways that require us to undertake this effort. And we look forward, together with our friends in Egypt and others, to being successful in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Kerry, Minister Shukri, for your remarks and for setting the stage for this event and for the commitment you have both showed in supporting adaptation action in Africa and for highlighting the priority given to implementation at COP27. Thank you both very much. Distinguished participants, now it's time for us to hear from our distinguished panelists who will shed some light and make few remarks and share their perspectives on the issue of adaptation in Africa. First on the panel is our Minister of Environment, Dr. Yasmin Fouad, who will make the first remarks. Minister Fouad.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Wael. Mr. President, John, at the outset, I would like just to express the thanks and appreciation to the U.S. for having that part on adaptation and putting that high on the agenda, as well as Minister Shukri. It's a fact that the figures are stunning. Of 173 million are suffering from floods in Africa and others from drought. And it's only 3%, according to the figures, that climate finance would go to the sub-Sahara. And this is a COP for implementation. We all came here after Paris Rule Book calling for an implementation. So adaptation is not only a priority, it's a must and it's essential. And finance has to go directly to Africa in that regard. But also we need to be innovative, realistic. We need to adapt effectively, efficiently, and rapidly, while putting the human needs at the heart of the climate action in this COP. 3 important messages here. The first one, the COP27 presidency was very keen to put adaptation high on the global initiatives. Initiatives that meet the crisis that we have in 2022. Fast for agriculture that will be announced tomorrow. ICANN for nutrition. Decent life for Africa to be more resilient, but much more important, the women in Africa and how they would be more resilient as they are the most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. And that will be announced during the Gender Day. However, we all know that adaptation and the bottleneck that it's not bankable, trying to make that bankable, how can the private sector work on that? We're working on the global goal on adaptation and we will be progressing on that. But one simple idea, It's not mitigation or adaptation for Africa. It's both, and they can work together. The model that Egypt is presenting on energy as a bankable, one, rapid and coupled with water and food nexus, let us move from policy to actual practice, makes us having the energy, water, and food for the future generation as the basic need in the heart of the climate discussion. Different example of production of lands and agricultural lands, also irrigation, as well as protecting the small farmers. But here, after 2015, we have the accelerator. The AAI was meant to be the accelerator. It's not an initiative that is there to implement adaptation project, but accelerate the access to finance. So here today, in COP27, if we have the money, if we have the accelerator, and if we have the idea, we will be framing the architecture of climate finance for adaptation by having that model for Africa together for implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Fouad, for your remarks, and particularly for pointing out the difficulties of attracting investment to the adaptation side of the equation. Thank you, Minister. Next, we have Mr. Seni Nafou, head of the coordinator of the Africa Adaptation Initiative, which is a continent-wide initiative launched in 2015 at COP21 in Paris by the African heads of states to strengthen concrete adaptation action on the ground. Seni has also been the spokesperson of the African Group of Negotiators and also served as presidential envoy for climate change to the late Malayan president. Seni, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Wael. And let me really commend Egypt for the leadership in 2015 and 2022. In 2015, I was here when President Sisi launched the AAI and the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative, but I was here throughout. I travel at least 11 times in Cairo, where I work with then Assistant Minister Fouad and now Minister on designing the Africa Adaptation Initiative and the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative. So thank you, you have delivered. And thank you for hosting us in 2022 in Al Dunya, Cairo. That's the first point. In a snapshot, and you have said it, Minister, very well, AAI is a continental effort which works on the continuum of science, policy, and practice, linking science, policy, practice for action across 4 pillars: climate information services, which is key, and President Biden has alluded to that, early warning system, institutions and policies, action, thematic action, actions across geographies, and finally, finance. Accessing finance, structuring finance, scaling up finance. That's the initiative in a snapshot. Now, in terms of implementation, President Shukri, you've said it, this is an implementation COP. This is about action, and this is about action on adaptation. So we have, over the last few months, identified critical nexus for both eradicating poverty, enhancing development, and dealing with climate change. The first nexus is on the food system, is on food security, and we're very happy that the US is working with us on that one. And what we have seen in the last 2 years with the pandemic, with the war in Ukraine, the disruption it has created on the continent. On the continent, we have as well African pioneers, African champions who have solutions across the value chain. So we'll be working on with African companies, with African pioneers and champions to scale up their solutions through grants, reimbursable grant, private equity guarantees, because the solutions are here, whether through local indigenous grains, whether through drip irrigation system, through climate for tech, the solutions are here. So we'll be working on that first one, but not only on that one, we'll be working also on rural Africa, on ensuring decent life for rural Africa, not just in Egypt. We're building on Aya Karima in Egypt and bringing those solutions to the whole continent. We'll be launching that initiative with Egypt for the whole continent in a few days. We're going to work also on resilient infrastructure. on making sure that the infrastructure which Africa will build, which is about 75 to 100 billion per year, is made resilient to climate change. We've seen our dear beloved Durban, which launched the Paris process, being built climate resilient infra, and we're going to be working with the African private sector to build the type of vehicles which are needed to deal with that. And finally, what we have realized is that there's a disconnect between those who are demanding climate finance and those who are supplying climate finance. On the demand side, all countries will tell you, subnationals will tell you that they have projects and the projects are ready. The suppliers of finance will tell you the pipeline is not bankable, the pipeline is not fundable. So we'll be working on having sort of a market maker platform, having a project preparation facility, working to make sure that we can make the programs and projects fundable and bankable for different kinds of investments, for different kinds of financial instruments, so that you really have that matching and you have trillions flowing. So Mr. President, action is underway. We will be leading, and we'll be leading from here in Cairo. It's I think a sign. We're having this meeting on Friday. This is Juma. God bless you. God bless Africa. God bless the US. God bless every country here, each and every one of you. We're ready for business. AI is here, and we're ready to work with you at scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nafou, for your words and for your hard work really reviving and bringing AAI to fruition. And thank you for all your service in this regard. Next, we will hear from Mr. Craig Kogo, the founder and CEO of Pegasus, which is a private equity fund created in 1995. Through Mr. Kogo's leadership, Pegasus has focused on sectors influenced by global resource scarcity. Pegasus currently manages the Global Subnational Climate Fund, which is focused on climate mitigation in emerging markets, and the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, which is an oceans-focused adaptation fund that seeks to enhance the resiliency of coral reef ecosystems. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for really giving us this opportunity to pioneer something that I think is truly transformational. This accelerator with the $25 million provided by the U.S., I think will dramatically unlock investments that are needed in food security. We're excited at Pegasus to be participating in the initiative. We've committed to mobilize at least $100 million in capital to fund solutions identified by the accelerator. And I think the most important thing is, as Ambassador Nafou said, is these are not far off. These are not technology investments. There are ample opportunities to invest today, whether we need concessional capital, studies, capacity building, but there are plenty of opportunities to invest in adaptation projects and products that will make sense with the help of the accelerator. At Pegasus, as mentioned, we have two funds that invest in adaptation and mitigation. And particularly, we intend to invest in critical gaps that connect, as again, Ambassador Nafou said, local communities to adaptation solutions, including cold storage logistics, climate-smart agriculture, and sustainable fishing and aquaculture. We believe we can only make a meaningful difference if we focus on solutions at the local level. Local production, local training, local storage, and local processing in Africa for Africans. Let me give you three quick examples of what we think are things the accelerator can help us to invest in transformationally right now. The first is a project in West Africa where we're working to expand production of a popular local staple grain called fonio. Many of you, I think, know it. It's not only nutritious, delicious, but highly drought resistant and with a far lower carbon footprint than conventional grains. In this project, we hope to create immediate revenue opportunities for 30,000 women farmers. We intend to grow that dramatically as this becomes a supplemental income instead of the monoculture they're doing now. Secondly, we're looking at a network in West Africa of 125,000 farmers, which are empowering 4,000 youth entrepreneurs to scale climate-smart agriculture in methods, teaching, and resilience. And at the same time, in connection with this group, we would invest in processing to take the crops grown in the new regenerative agriculture methodologies. Ultimately, our goal is to take that 125,000 farmers to 1 million and provide processing and markets for them. Third, as another example of something that's sorely needed for resilience, both for food, but also I'd say for health with vaccines, is the area of cold storage. It's a huge problem in Africa and other places, and it's one I don't frankly understand why it hasn't been solved. It's not a technology issue. Huge percentages of crops are lost to spoilage, a major threat to food security. We are looking at bringing large-scale cold storage solutions first to Morocco, then to Senegal, and then to spread to Cote d'Ivoire and other countries in West Africa. This can improve farmer incomes without further land conversion, will reduce the methane emissions we've talked about, which food waste produces, and will improve dramatically health of local populations with more nutritious food. I could go on and talk about more examples, which we have, but from this pipeline, and there is more, I am really confident that this accelerator, thank you, Secretary Kerry in America, thank you, Minister, this accelerator will unlock, as really this is meant to be a showcase, billions of dollars of investment, which we can participate and other firms to follow. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the work you've put in and for the contributions Pegasus has made. Next, we have Mr. Mike Froman, the Vice Chairman and CEO for Strategic Growth at MasterCard. He also serves as Vice Chairman and President, Strategic Growth for MasterCard. In that role, he is responsible for growing strategic partnerships, scaling new business opportunities, and advancing the company's efforts to partner with governments and other institutions to address major societal and economic issues. Thank you, Mr. Froman, for being with us, and please go ahead and make your remarks.
Secretary Kerry, Minister Shukri, thank you very much for having us. And it's hard to talk about resilience and adaptation in Africa without focusing on farmers. Agriculture represents about a quarter of GDP in Africa, 60% of the workforce, over 350 million people. And most of those farmers are smallholder farmers who are often struggling to achieve economic security. When you layer on top of that the impact of climate change, the increased drought, the reduced yields, higher food insecurity, greater waste, it is a challenge that needs to be addressed. And that's why we launched something called Farm Pass, which is a platform that digitizes the relationship between farmers, buyers, suppliers, and financial institutions, and allows farmers to get better prices for their product, to get access to the seeds and fertilizer and tools that they need, and very importantly, for many of them who've been unbanked or underbanked for their whole life, to get access to capital, to get access to credit, to be able to expand their businesses. In this, we partner with African partners like Equity Bank and Yo Bank, Uganda, Co-op Bank in Kenya, and we're seeing some really promising results. Farmers achieving 20 to 50% more, getting 20 to 50% more for their products, getting paid what they deserved, achieving 20% higher production and wasting less. And it's making them able to better deal with the challenges of climate change, to be more resilient financially, and to be able to adapt. This is part of a larger effort called Community Pass, which seeks to connect farmers and families and communities to the digital economy, whether it's digital ID or getting micro and small businesses access to credit or healthcare, and being able to track vaccines for individuals and for families. And today we're committing to bring 30 million people through Community Pass into the digital economy over the next 5 years, including expanding our presence in Africa. It started as part of our financial inclusion efforts. We have a goal of bringing 1 billion people around the world into the digital economy by 2025, 50 million micro and small merchants, 25 million women-owned businesses. But as President Biden said, there's an inextricable link between inclusive growth and the challenges of climate change. And resilience and adaptation and inclusive growth all go hand in hand. It's part of a larger restoration effort we're engaged with called the Priceless Planet Coalition, with 130 partners to plant 100 million trees. And with Conservation International and World Resources Institute. We have 4 sites in Africa: Kenya, DRC, Madagascar, and Malawi. Why are we doing this? We're a credit card company, or some people think we're a credit card company. We tend to think of ourselves as a technology company because it's obvious to us we thrive when economies thrive, and economies thrive over the long term only if they're inclusive and sustainable. And that's the foundation of our effort to embed our ESG and our sustainability efforts in our corporate strategy. And it's at the heart of our efforts to take our network, our 20,000 banks, our 92 million merchants, our 3 billion cardholders, and figure out how to use that network to address issues like adaptation and resilience in Africa. So thank you to the US government and the Egyptian government for including us in this event, and thank everybody here who's making commitments along these lines.
Thank you very much, Mr. Froman, for sharing with us all the contributions and the hard work being done by MasterCard. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. Next, we have Wanjira Matai, our friend and managing director for Africa at the World Resources Institute. She's an inspiring leader with more than 20 years of experience advocating for social and environmental change. And most importantly, she has been named several times as one of the most 100 influential women in Africa. You have the floor now, Wanjira.
Thank you very much. Secretary Kerry and Minister Shukri, Mr. Fuad, thank you so much. What a great day for Africa indeed. For far too long, we have known that Africa and at least on climate adaptation, developing countries and Africa in particular are always punching above their weight. We collectively have had the opportunity to act swiftly. We've been slow at it, but we are simply not moving fast enough. We're prioritizing, however, institutional capacity building. So in addition to all the announcements that are being made, how important it is that we cushion communities by building institutional capacity. Now, in this journey to build long-term resilience, nothing is more important than investing in our own research, collecting our own data with the necessary nuance and cultural sensitivity, because we need to collect and analyze that data and then communicate the emerging evidence back to local communities, local organizations, local research organizations, universities, and most importantly, to our governments. And this ought to be routine. Now, African governments are already leading the charge on adaptation. Today, our governments spend up to 5% on GDP on adaptation, even as they lose 5 to 15% from climate impacts. Now, this is totally unbearable, especially at a time of such tight and highly leveraged fiscal times and massive priorities like poverty alleviation. So we need global solidarity like never before on adaptation in particular. And in fact, I walked by one wall as I was coming here that said, ambition in solidarity. We need that ambition ratcheted up on solidarity. We need dedicated investments that build solid, long-term capacities for our government institutions, universities, and in fact, for our people. So I'm really excited about the Resilience and Adaptation Mainstreaming Program, or RAMP. It's just one example of the sort of efforts that offer investments that strengthen government ministries like our finance ministries, environment, economics, building tools and practices that will manage economic impacts to climate change. Now, with over a dozen African universities and technical partners, RAMP is focusing on building capacities in universities and in domestic research institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, an African-led climate agenda needs a solid, rock-solid intellectual, political, and technological foundations. We have, on the one hand, to build the data, tools, and analysis that we need, but on the other, the capacity to build in the necessary sustainability by embedding all of these investments in local institutions. That's the only way they will last and be enduring. Now, we know that Africa's vulnerability to climate change is getting worse by the day. In Kenya, we are staring at the 5th year of consecutive failed rains, and I just shudder to think of what the impact and what this means for us, our families, and our children. But here's the thing. I know that this is true for others as well, but the truth is, it's an amazing time to be living in Africa today. We know that if we're honest with ourselves, we will admit that we are facing a deep crisis in empathy. And that's why we're moving slowly. We're living in increasingly unempathetic times. A dear colleague, Arunaba Ghosh, from the Center for Environment and Energy and Water said it perfectly. He said, the reason there's sluggish progress is that the biggest challenge that we face is a lack of empathy, a lack of understanding of our fellow humans of other colors, cultures, genders, and geographies. We must not be those people. But that's also why I'm buoyed by moments like this. Moments like this bring joy because this is where we can celebrate and spotlight initiatives like RAMP, like AAI, and others that will demonstrate real and genuine signals of solidarity. So we need together to build the physical and institutional infrastructure that's required. Here's the thing, the truth is that it is an amazing time to be African today. I don't know one African, especially young African, who's not excited about that. Despite all the challenges, it is a moment like no other. Africa is buzzing with unparalleled possibility. Entrepreneurs in every corner, our youthful population that is brilliant, fast-growing economies, expanding democratic space, the healthiest lung on the planet, the mighty Congo forest, the sun-kissed region, most sun-kissed in the world, amazing biodiversity, and a renaissance in arts, music, and culture, and on and on. It is indeed a moment that calls for radical partnership with Africa. Yes, partnership. Imagine just how much further we would go together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wanjira, and thank you for ending on that very positive note, which exemplifies what we're doing here. We're building partnerships and establishing cooperation as the foundation for movement forward. Panelists, we're very happy for your inspiring contributions. Thank you very much. And this panel in itself represents what we have been calling for, all stakeholder partners representing homegrown initiatives. We have Pegasus, private equity, we have MasterCard representing the corporate world, and finally the research community through WRI. This is exactly the approach that we in Egypt have called for. Governments can't do it alone. We need to involve all aspects, all parts of society, all sectors, as we structure movement forward, as we devise policies, and ultimately as we implement them. So thank you all to our panelists, and if we could give them a round of applause and appreciation. Now we can move to a very important part of our proceedings tonight, and we'll hear some very important remarks coming from the floor. First, we'll hear from German State Secretary Jochen Flassbarth, who's always been cooperating with the government of Egypt on multiple endeavors over the years, followed by Mr. Jonathan Pershing, again, a legend in the field of climate change over the years from Hewlett Foundation now, and Ms. Yamid Dagnet from Open Society Foundation, and then from Mr. Enoch Chikava for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. State Minister Flassbarth, please.
Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, Wael, for this very kind introduction. I will be fast. Last year in Glasgow, we agreed on doubling adaptation finance, and now we need, obviously, to walk the talk. And there was another ask by our partners, not only in Africa, also from other developing threat, and that is to balance adaptation and finance. And I'm to say that Germany reached this goal last year, 2021. We invested 2.6 billion on, which is 49% of our overall public. So now, for the AAI. We all supported AAI from the beginning when President Assisi launched it, and I'm happy to announce here the Ambassador Saini Nafo that we will pledge another 5 million for your operations. That will be, thank you. That will be not, AAI will be a very important facilitator. That's real mutual work. AAI will be a very important facilitator for the Team Europe initiative to enhance adaptation and resilience in Africa that will be launched on Wednesday together with the Netherlands, Denmark and France, Germany and the EU Commission, and will be launched by Executive Vice President Franz Timmermans and Minister Schulze. And the last one, tomorrow we will have a champions meeting for African adaptation efforts, and I will make there a significant announcement, which I'm not allowed to make today because organizers asked me to wait until tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here at this particular event. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Secretary Kerry, Ambassador. Thank you so much for having us here. I wanted to talk about pieces of the puzzle, which is the piece on training. One of the things that I've observed in my career is the importance of having trained, competent, and capable people who actually can both design and implement an agenda. Adaptation is no different. We currently need to develop that cadre, not just at an academic institution, but in country. As Wanjira Maathai said, as Saini Nafo said, we don't have them. If we look at the history of the NDCs, the vast majority of developing countries in their NDCs noted capacity limitations, capacity constraints. So it gives me great pleasure on behalf of the Hewlett Foundation to make a contribution to this new center in Cairo, the Center on Learning and Excellence in Adaptation and Resilience. So with that, I want to pass on the microphone, but look forward to working with you as the center is developed.
Thank you very much. The Open Society Foundation is very pleased to support today the African Adaptation Initiative, and especially the strengthening of its institutional capacity and its pioneering project in rural local communities called EcoVerse. Today, we commit at least $4.5 million by 2025, not only to avert or survive catastrophic climate impacts, but for marginalized regions, marginalized communities, farmers, youth, and women entrepreneurs to live in dignity and thrive. It's a matter for the Open Society Foundations of social and economic justice. Let us be humble here and pragmatic. The Open Society Foundation's grant is a drop in the ocean of investment needed to support resilience and empowerment. You can call it a seed, a bet. The real question is who is next. Our journey doesn't end there. We are working to explore ways to foster blended finance opportunities, and we call for more from the donor communities to join us and to embrace the journey, not just with the solidarity spirit, but with the pioneering spirit of implementation, since this is a COP about implementation. Thank you.
And unfortunately, our last speaker had to depart early, so you'll just have to wait for more announcements later.
Thank you very much to all those who spoke from the floor, making generous contributions to the cause of Adaptation Africa, supporting it in different shapes and forms. We much appreciate that, and we look forward to continued support from partners from around the world. Excellencies, ministers, distinguished guests, and participants, this brings us to the end of the special event on Adaptation Africa. It just remains to me to extend profound and deep appreciation to Minister Shukri, to Secretary Kerry for their commitment, their support for all of the work that was demonstrated today. Without their political support and motivation, we wouldn't have been doing this today. So thank you both, Minister and Secretary. I'd just like to, we will gather now for a small group photo here, but I encourage everyone to stay on with us for another maybe 45-minute event focusing on the NWAFI program and the collective support by the government of Germany and the government of the United States, which will also be presided by Secretary Kerry and Minister Shukri, who have been very generous with their time today. We appreciate that. Thank you all, and have a good evening.
Master charge. I knew this guy when we were working on it. And I was this tall. Hero. You want to light up? Don't go away, folks.